Best of r/malicious compliance episode 108. Subscribe for edit videos daily. This was years ago. I worked as a manager of a customer service place that stayed open till after midnight. Occasionally, a shipment was late, so the night person had to work later and claimed overtime. But this one employee decided to have a coffee and visit and then clock out and claimed 30 minutes of overtime almost every night shift. This shift had a half-hour lunch break at supper time, which most people preferred. So I changed this one person's shift to a 1-hour lunch break and moved the end of the shift 30 minutes later. So when everyone else got to go home at 12:30 am, she had to stay until 1 am every shift without any overtime. She said that was against the collective agreement, but she never actually read it, so I got to show her where I had the right to make the change. After a few weeks she promised to stop claiming overtime if she could switch back to a 30-minute lunch break. Thank you. Next. My family owned a couple stores on a beach that sold t-shirts, towels and bikinis. The bikinis were a big seller and we decided to mark them down for the week from $39.99 to $24.99. I put a sign up that showed the sale price, and roughly an hour later a little kid knocked the sign down. Before I could replace it, a big, sweaty, intimidating gentleman comes up to me and slams his hands on the counter. "Sweaty man, yo, my girl wants these 2 bikinis and you are going to give me a deal, or I take my business elsewhere." I was going to tell him about the sale, but once he demanded a deal and he tried to intimidate me with his size and slamming on the counter, I decided against it. I will give you 2 for $60. Sweaty man, done. Completed the sale, and as the man was leaving I put the sale sign back up. Thank you. Next. Back in the 90s, I went to get some bolts from an old-fashioned hardware shop that had full service. It was about a week before Christmas, so there were several customers present. I described the bolt that I needed, stated the diameter and indicated length by hand gesture. The old bloke wanders off into the back of the shop and his voice floated out of the depths. "How long did you want the bolts?" Straight-faced, I replied. Permanently. Dead silence from the back of the shop. Roars of laughter from the customers. Thank you. Next. This is short, but I think you may enjoy it. While I check my 2 youngest children for a walk, my wife left our oldest daughter home alone for about 15 minutes. My oldest is about 1/2 years old and it's becoming more comfortable trying to stay at home by herself. When I got home from the walk I found my daughter eating cookies at 10:30 in the morning. When my wife got home, she commented to my daughter that I told you not to raid the kitchen. My daughter's response was that her mom had said not to raid the refrigerator. Thank you. Next. This is my first post. Sorry about the grammar and spelling. Mobile yada yada. This is a short story, not really much action, but still satisfying nevertheless. So my sister is a big lazy jerk, and every time we eat, we usually have milk. Every time, my parents ask me to get the milk, so I comply. Eventually, this makes me unhappy, because S always just drinks it all in one go. Cue the malicious compliance. So one time, I ask her to pour the milk. She gets it out, but then just leaves it out as we start eating. This time, it just happens to be that we were mixing the unsweetened and vanilla kind. We start eating and my sister immediately asks me to pour the milk. So I do, except I change the proportions. Normally, we have half of each. Instead, I literally just poured just unsweetened. No reaction, but the satisfaction was huge. Edit, spelling, edit 2. Thanks for 100 upvotes everyone. Never thought it would become this popular. Thank you. Next. This isn't my story, but my parents. It was probably the first time I witnessed malicious compliance and I still remember it well. It was about 25 years ago, so I was about 8, and we had just moved into a 150-year-old house that was in need of major repairs. My dad, thinking ahead, knew he would need a large garage/workshop to really get started on the renovations properly. On the edge of our yard was an ancient barn that was falling apart and needed to be torn down. My dad figured this was the best place to build his new workshop, so that was the plan. We had met and were on good terms with all the neighbors at that point. When the plans for the new workshop were finished, my parents went around to all the neighbors as a courtesy to show them the plans and get their blessings. The neighbors whose property the current barn and new workshop would border, I'll call them the Peters, were concerned about the height. The existing barn was 16 feet high and they asked if we could only build it one story, 12 feet max, as to not block the sun in their yard. Sure, no problem, my parents agreed. They wanted to go 2 stories for extra storage, but just one wasn't a deal breaker. So the old barn was torn down and the foundation laid for the new one. During that time, there was a falling out with the Peters and my parents. I'm not sure what happened, but it turned nasty. One day, my brother and I were playing street hockey and Mr. Peters came out yelling at us, "Get off the road, you half-breed shits. My dad is black, so we're both half black. You have to earn your place in this town." Upon hearing this, my mom had to physically restrain my dad from going over and beating the living shit out of him. Eventually, he cooled off and started on his plan. The plans for one story went out the window. Soon, the new garage that was only supposed to be 1 story soon gained a second in the blueprints. If they were going to direct racist comments at his kids, my dad would build what he wanted. As construction started, the Peters came over to ask why there was 2 stories being built and were told to go fuck themselves. We didn't hear from them again until the roof started to go on. The bylaws of the township limited all out structures to 24 feet high. The Peters called the township and then a building inspector, claiming that the new garage was over 24 feet high. If it was over height, the entire thing would have to be torn down and rebuilt, costing us tens of thousands of dollars. I remember the Peters standing there, watching the inspector, with smug looks on their faces. 2 days later, we got the final report back from the township and inspector. 23 feet, 11 inches, just as my dad had drawn up in his new plans. He sent me up on the roof of the garage, just plywood, no singles yet, with some spray paint, and had me write 23 feet 11 inches, height approved in 2-foot high neon orange letters across the entire roof, facing their yard and house. Not only did the garage block all sunlight from reaching their yard, but my dad waited until everything else was done before he shingled that side of the roof. They had to stare at those neon orange letters for almost 3 years. It may not be much, but it certainly ruined the enjoyment of their newly darkened yard, and there was nothing that could be done about it, because it was height approved. They didn't comply with the Peters' request, but they certainly complied with the bylaws as maliciously as they could. Edit, me fail English? That's impossible. Thank you. Next. This happened during my time working in a call center for a cell phone provider. We had our fair share of jerks, but rarely got the chance to give them a taste of their own medicine. Me. Hello, thank you for calling. Phone provider, this is Moist Walrus. How can I help you? Rude guy, my wife and I are upgrading our phones. You will waive half the upgrade fees or I'm leaving. Oh great, a credit demander. Wonderful. Me. I would love to work with you. Please hold while I work with my supervisor to see what we can do. We had free range to credit, but we would get in trouble if we did it too much. So I would always do a chat consult with supervisors before crediting. I looped a supervisor in and asked if I can go ahead. Supervisor, I checked his account and he has the option for 2 credits for upgrade fees. How many did he want credited? Me, just 1. Supervisor, well, I can't tell you what to do, but I will give him what he wants. A smile formed across my face as I took the call off hold. Me, I'm sorry for the hold, sir. We would love to credit you for the 1 upgrade fee. Rude guy, see, was that so hard? Me, no, not at all. You have a great day, sir. I've never been happier about issuing a credit.